Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his bad. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
Tom Will is a poet whose collections, including Pale Townie, American Cats Are in a Big Country, and soon available from Farthest Heaven, rhymes. Okay, this is the latest. I've been fortunate. One of the cool things about being in my position is every once in a while I get to read a book before pretty much anybody else. A few people have read it, so I have been lucky enough to read rhymes over the last couple days and really enjoyed the heck out of it. Tom's work is a masterful revitalization of old forms with new images, and that's particularly true in this case. His work is often clever, always unique, and this latest collection is no different. So if you're listening out there, you're interested in new poetry, even if you're not, even if you're just poetry curious, get yourself a copy of Rhymes by Tom Will. Support an incredibly talented writer and the great indie press, Farthest Heaven, who are always doing cool things. Tom, thanks for joining me. Thanks for your time. And it's good to finally, I guess, virtually meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking a second ago, and it was like 2022. It might even have been 2021 when we started talking, which is like,
yeah,
it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, and two, it must be that long ago because both of us are like, why did we even start talking? Like it's one thing that there's people I follow and I just know, I follow them forever, and it's the cable I move from house to house with, or whatever.
Right.
We've been talking, like, you mailed me books, like, it's no small thing. And also, you've had the privilege, let's just say privilege, of getting to read this next book before it's out. I also have had the ability to read a bit of Earth and Dark here before the the man on the street here, which was very nice, and and I might get a chance to read something else of yours.
Well, there's some Farthest Heaven. I'm part of the Farthest Heaven retinue now, so we'll see. I haven't said a ton about it yet, but I'm in the group chat, so that's the first start. Yeah, it's fun. For people who are listening, you probably don't realize it. There's a whole samizdat out there of people passing each other's books around to each other in PDF and stuff. It's pretty fun. So, I really enjoyed Rhymes. I haven't read every poem you've ever written, but the stuff I've read, I'm always surprised by the transition you've sort of made from the previous thing, and yet how it feels like it's still work by Tom Will. I'm very interested in overall sort of what your ideas about poetry and all of that are, and we're going to get to that. But I think maybe the most interesting thing about this book, it's called Rhymes, and when I first saw that, I was like, is Tom just being clever here, as he is? You're a very clever guy, and I mean that in the most positive sense possible. In the terms of playful and creative and doing different things that people might not expect. And I was like, is this going to be like a kind of a joke, like it's not going to rhyme? And then I open it up and I'm like, oh, it rhymes. So first I want to ask you, why doesn't poetry rhyme anymore other than yourself? When did we stop, and why did we stop making poems rhyme, do you think?
We forgot how.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. You could. At the risk of will surely be an oversimplification at best, and me showing my general ignorance of the field, present and historical at worst. I would, which I'm happy, which I will try here in a second. But even with my own books, which there are a little more than there should be. There's like 5 of them at this point. Even some of those, a good deal of them aren't rhymed. So it's I'm not immune to it myself. I don't hate it. I certainly don't. But that's not really answering the question. That's just saying why. That's just me saying I don't. I'm not. I like to describe myself as not a capital F formalist, not big forma,
Right.
And there's always a bigger formalist is the thing too, there's always, so it's a bad game to be in. still not answering your question. Why don't
That's all right.
people rhyme anymore? Well, I guess the first time I really thought about it as being something that was like déclassé or like gauche or whatever was hearing some poet talk at some point, and this was 10, 15 years ago. I don't remember why I was there or who I was there with, but some poet, and meaning, they were a teacher that had books out. That's a poet, right? They teach writing, a creative writing program. And they were talking about the baggage. They were talking about, I remember this word baggage. They said, the baggage of meter and rhyme. And I'm trying very hard. It's very hard to talk about this and not talk about like meter as a whole, or versification as a whole, which I'm not too stuffy about. Some people go, this is poetry is verse. But I remember this person talking about, the baggage of, and I guess instinctively that was just, software update. This is bad, and your teacher won't like it, and I want my teacher to like it, So
Right.
But I guess at a certain point, that idea in the minds of people generally, I guess, and in me, the way back when, this idea of just anything, using, and this is funny too, because like you could probably dig up a parody of a poet that was written in like the late 19th, early 20th century, and it's like very florid and it's very over the top, and it's using poetic device very poorly, and it's using like really corny rhymes too, or something like that. But you could probably, pick up any random Barnes and Noble, lowercase, Instagram poet book, which is basically half of Barnes and Noble's poetry section at this point, which is minuscule. And and you would probably be laughing in the same way at a lot of the excesses and just crowded trades of the recent stuff. So I'm not too sure we've gotten away from the problem of baggage, right? But I'm not sure if I'm getting closer to answering your question. Why don't people rhyme anymore? But I'd say overall it's considered extremely, it's like, why don't people wear MAGA hats anymore?
Right.
It's like,
Right.
like, do you want to have your drink thrown at you, so to speak, in the MFA program, so to speak, which I've never attended. I'm talking about things I don't really know about.
Sure.
But it's seen as, it's seen as June Spoon, and it's seen as, Now again, there's ways to get around this. You can be a, slam poet. You can write songs.
Right. Yeah, you'd be a rapper, right?
The arch formalists tend to leave musicians alone. They tend to leave songwriters alone. No one's picking up the Songs Ohio album and going, I can't stand his versification. So I tend to think of it in that way, where if it's good, it's good. Which is, wow. Thanks for having me on to say.
Well, that's the best rule. I mean, that's the best rule. I think it's. This isn't certainly me asking that question is certainly not me advocating like, some kind of ardent backlash that like all poetry should rhime,
Surely.
There was something delightful opening this up and reading through and like, it rhyme. Like it felt, I'll give you like I've been reading, I am periodically, maybe always reading Yeats. And I'm trying to memorize a few Yeats poems, right? And I'm reading Sailing to Byzantium, and that guy's rhyming his ass off. And actually, you don't even really notice it rhyming somehow. Like he's got this means of just making it feel like that's obviously what the next word should be, sort of.
That's very, very, very true. And if I could just, really quickly, love Yeats, obviously, but I think the best poets, even when they're using forms, not using forms, doesn't matter. But when they're using forms, again, their voice is coming through not so much because of rhyme per se, but despite it almost. They're doing things up through through on top of it and whatnot, and that's why it will you won't feel like they're doing it for some sort of pro forma for the sake of sort of thing, and that bothers me when you read a bad rhyme poem. It feels like it feels like a Toastmasters club, like one of these clubs where they give you a topic and you just have to sort of sound a little, in a certain way about it and talk impromptu, and that's
Yeah.
people. You don't have to be an expert in poetry to be like, oh, I don't really like that.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
quite it.
yeah, I mean, it does remind me, and I don't mean to, this is coming from my relative ignorance of poetry, sort of history of poetry and a lot of the conventions and things. But it does sort of remind me of like, there was like this period like in the 90s when like rap music was a popular format for people buying CDs and stuff, but it also had like made its way into advertising and stuff. And so you always had you'd have like a Burger King commercial with like a cheesy hard end rhyme, right?
Yeah.
Versus like somebody who could actually rap, right? Who could actually like make this feel like they were just sort of talking and it just happened to all
Sure,
work
yeah.
together. There's a sort of, I feel like, a similar distinction where you could probably pick up some terribly rhymed poetry, which is definitely not what you're doing in rhymes.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you too to talk about. I was hoping you could give us like talk us through some of the forms you're using, because the biggest, I think, the one that's most emphasized in this collection is the roundel, but we have a few more. What can you tell us? What is a roundel, and like sort of where does it come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, roundel, and this is I might just start like spelling them because there are several forms that have extremely similar names and extremely similar forms, right? So if you're just listening to this, it's like I'm always wary discussing forms that like in this format or any format, it'll just divulge into like that, like you get together with your friends and the one friend you don't know a lot. And that friend's like, have you ever played this card game? And you're like, no, I've never heard of this. And they're like, let me explain the rules to you. You know what I mean? There's cards around. You're not sitting at a table, and they're like, let me explain the rule of this. And it's like, oh no. So I'm gonna try. So I'm gonna try and do this in a good way, best I can. So roundel, Roundel. That form is a form that was invented by Swinburne, a Victorian poet. This is in the latter. His life can pretty easily be cleaved into two halves. His like sort of crazy running around London and drinking brandy and collapsing days, and then his like later half where his friends are like, you can't do this anymore because you're gonna die. So they more or less like march him out to the country, and he like lives in the country,
Okay.
and is allowed to have like one glass of beer a day for like the last half of his life. And that's pretty much the end of his. You could, as far as most even biographies are concerned, that's the end of his life. The bulk of it is him writing ballads and him writing Atalanta and things like that. But nonetheless, in this second part of his life, he's still publishing a lot. He wrote a ton. But one of these things he writes is a book called A Century of Roundels. That term. By century, just meaning he wrote 100 of them. And again, like if you read a modern biography of Swinburne, like it might not even include anything about this collection, which was dashed off by all accounts. He wrote it in like 3 or 4 months. He wrote like 100 of these poems, and like he wrote them on little note cards, which is funny because I don't know many writers that do that. I know that Nabokov was notorious for writing on index cards, but he wrote all these on index cards and sent them in basically to be published with whoever his publisher was. And there was like barely any edits to any of them. Like you could just tell he was just in the mode for better or for worse. If you read it, some are really great. But nonetheless, that was the form. I don't remember exactly how I stumbled into it. But I found it really charming as a result of the actual form. And what the actual form is of a roundel poem is, it's an 11-line poem. I describe it at its most simple as the first line of the poem basically contains the DNA for the rest of the poem. So we'll use a Swinburne poem as an example. This is the last roundel in his century of roundels. I think it's called Envoy. Envoy, Envoi, which in a French ballad is the last stanza of the ballad. It's it just means like sent off, sent away, go away, to be sent. And that poem is Envoy, and it goes like this. Fly, white butterflies out to sea, pale, frail wings for the winds to try. Small white wings we scarce can see, fly. Here and there may a chance-caught eye note in a score of you, twain or three, brighter or darker in tinge or dye. Some fly high as a laugh of glee, some fly soft as a low long sigh, all to that haven where each would be, fly. Low long sigh, isn't that nice?
Yeah,
There's a good one.
Yeah.
But okay, so the basic bones of that is all in the first line. Fly, white butterflies out to sea. And the end of that rhyme is sea. The next line, pale frail wings for the winds to try. Small white wings we scarce can see, fly. So it's basically three stanzas. The first word of the first line, fly, white butterflies out to sea, fly. The first word of the first line becomes a refrain that you have to end your first stanza with, and then you have a middle stanza that's just B-A-B again. And then you have a final three-line stanza, and you have to end that last stanza with that refrain word again. So the first line, you have the A rhyme at the end of it, obviously. You have whatever the general meter of it is, fly, white butterflies out to sea, fly, white butterflies out to sea. It's 8 syllables in pretty much IMs, So you have your meter, you have your A rhyme, then you have the B rhyme, because fly, that first word, is going to become your B rhyme for your end lines of your B lines, and it's also going to be your refrain. So it's a really interesting form. It's really tight, obviously. You've got 11 lines, and a lot of it's pretty well hashed out before you put your shoes on.
Before you even started. Yeah.
So you better like whatever your first line is, and you better like what your first word is. Now he didn't just come up with that whole cloth, and the title is kind of an indication of that. It's loosely based on two French forms, the roundel and the rondeau. Again, getting a little confusing here. Roundel, R-O-N-D-E-L, very similar. And rondeau, R-O-N-D-E-A-U. Well, we're trying to learn French here, but I'm always, E-A.
Yeah.
a lot of vowels together, which is
Sure
to make a fool of me. But those forms are pretty similar. The roundel, the entire first line is a refrain that you have to use twice again. So that's pretty similar. And then eventually something comes from that through the centuries called the roundel. And then with that, the first word or phrase becomes an unrhymed refrain that occurs twice more. In Flanders Fields is a really popular a really popular English language example of that. Do you know the poem in Flanders Fields?
I'm familiar with it.
Row by row and such. Each line ends in Flanders Fields. And it's really funny too because we're sitting here going, oh God, we don't know rhyme. The kids don't open the schools and whatever. But like even back then, when Flanders Fields came out, people were like, wow, he's written he's McCrae. I don't remember who the hell wrote it. But all these people were like writing reviews like he's written an ingenious variant on the sonnet. This is a very
right.
no one knew what the hell he was writing it in because no one was really doing rondeau. Yeah, so Swinburne basically took the idea of the roundel that was then developed into the rondeau, and he thought, oh, this is interesting. It has an unrhymed refrain. That's the first word or phrase of the first line. Well, what if I made it rhyme? That's basically the meat of it.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of the whole thing. Brief asterisk. Centuries and centuries before this, you can find Chaucer writing things he calls roundels.
Okay.
And if you'll examine them, they're the exact same form as a rondel. He just happened to that was his English transliteration of the French word rondel. He just called it a roundel.
Wow. So this is, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years then if Chaucer is using it.
12th, 13th century early.
Wow. Okay.
Iterations of this. Yeah. There was a huge craze in Victorian England of what I call the fussy French forms. Ballads, which have a refrain line, and it's all A-B rhyme schemes. Rondels, rondeau, and villanelles also, and that's an entry list. Sorry, we just got into 3 of them right there, but we can keep going. But basically, all those forms involve some sort of refrain line that has to be used again and again. The triolet is a fun, cute little one because it's only 8 lines, and the first 2 lines are the A and B refrain, and you have to start the poem with those 2 refrains, and you have to end the poem with those 2 refrains. And then the 4th line is the A refrain, just used by itself again. So it's an 8-line poem. Line 1 is refrain A, line 2 is refrain B, Line 4 is refrain A again, and then line 7 and 8 are refrains A and B again. So 5 of the 8 lines are refrains, which is
Our
insane.
refrains, right?
Yeah, it's
right.
really insane. If you think about it in terms of syllables, like you've got like 50 syllables, you've got like nothing to work with.
Right.
So
You can
that's
stuff so many refrains into this bad boy when you're
yeah,
working with the trio A.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a little, the more constricted they get, you really have to be, we're approaching limericks at a certain point,
Sure. Yeah.
You can try and be serious with that, but it's very hard to be serious with a. But there was a big resurgence in Victorian England of all these forms.
Well, and that's probably that resurgence. This is just a guess, but I feel like a fairly educated guess. This is probably why, because my level of sort of poetry education is, I had in college I had a couple poetry writing classes, which were more like workshop classes. You didn't learn anything about form. It was just like you write a poem and then people in workshop criticize it, right? But then like in high school, I think we had like a 2 or 3 week period where like we learned what meter and foot were and generally what meter was, but didn't get quite very good at it. And I wonder if like that being the sort of entryway into education about poetry kind of comes from this Victorian craze. Because in hindsight, it feels like kind of a bad way to intro poetry as a subject to kids, because it's almost like something you should maybe get to later. It's like we should just read some great poems and talk about them, and then maybe merge the people who are interested in it more into the meter stuff. Because I'll tell you what, when I was in like 10th grade, I couldn't have given a rip about meter. It didn't mean anything to me.
No, it's the least it's the least like romantic aspect of poetry. On like it's the one part of it that feels more like you're doing like you're doing geometry homework or something.
Right.
Where it's like, oh, I've got to, I've got to, poetry may just be like, oh, I've got to scan 10 poems, by, this sort of thing.
Right. Right.
Again, it's just, and I guess you could probably say that's similar to like teaching sheet music to a guitar player,
Mm-hmm.
where like the first book I had for guitar 25 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
was all like with the clef and, every good boy deserves, and it's hard enough just to put your finger on a Yamaha student classical guitar, that's like with like a massive, wide neck. It's hard enough to do that, but coming into it totally cold. And again, a lot of these books, music books, presuppose like you're an able-brained person living in the 20th century. Surely you know how to read sheet music, And I think in a similar way, we were sort of in this last generation. And God knows what the hell they teach the kids today. I don't know, and I don't want to know. But I think we were in that more or less in that last generation where like they were sort of making those suppositions about poetry. Where like surely they've read Milton, surely.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Surely they can scan trochaic tetrameter.
Right.
And again, I think in a lot of cases that was true, and I wish it was true. And we were really, dumbed down from the start,
Yeah.
And I remember it working the other way too, where like, we were reading a Villanelle, Rage Against the Dying of the Light by Dylan Thomas. That's a Villanelle. That's one of those French forms, and no one seems to mind that that's too metered or too stuffy. But then like the next page in my like high school poetry book would be like an E. Cummings poem, or like Williams' Red Wheelbarrow. And my poor teachers, I remember him literally saying like, I think there are some poems that are something poems and some poems that are nothing poems. I think this is a nothing poem. Like he literally said that, right? Which I can definitely, I'm not sentencing him to death. Surely anyone's opened up a book of anything and thought, is this something, pick up a Gertrude Stein book and go, am I being, is this
right.
It's not obviously, but again, much like the musician, at a certain point, if you want to seriously explore things and seriously say you're committed to your art, at a certain point, learning meter, learning sheet music or whatever doesn't feel like work. It just feels like I'm here and I want to go there, and this is how I go there, and so that doesn't feel like work. It just feels like going toward what I want to go to. Now, how to make kids like that? how to get kids to read in the age of Ruby Cowell. You know, my think piece for the Hub. I don't know. I don't actually know. And again, and I'm not, and a caveat, because I just sat here talking about these forms for like 30 minutes, but I'm not resurrecting the roundel. I'm not resurrecting the roundel because I think it's the best form on earth. I think everyone should be writing in it like it's a sonnet. It's just something that I found interesting, and I just wanted to see what I could do with it. And I'd say it's probably a writ large justification for any book I've put out. That's why I took Pale Fire and kept all the end rhymes and wrote a poem in front of it. I was like, can I get away with it? Can I do it? Could it be done? You know?
Well, yeah, and you did it. I mean, with Pale Townie, you did it. That was the first real thing I read of yours and was super impressed by. Tell people, for people who aren't familiar, give like the pitch or whatever you would for Pale Townie, because it's a great work of poetry and people should be reading it.
Well, Pale Fire by Nabokov. It's probably my favorite novel of his. I was actually just pissing around reading his. I said that, it's very crass. But I was just reading his Eugene Omegan translation, which I haven't looked at in a while. I've been on a reading books about translation kit. It doesn't matter. But Pale Fire, it's a very strange book overall. But it's a book in 4 sections. The first section is an introduction. Someone says, this great poet died, and I have his last manuscript, and I'm hiding with it, because his wife and his stupid editors don't understand him like I do. His greatest student or whatnot. And then the second portion is this final last poem of this dead poet, and it's 999 lines in 4 cantos, and it tells a story of the poet and the death of this poet's young daughter. And it's in, heroic couplets. It's in iambic pentameter, 10 syllables in iambs, and it's, couplets, A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, for the whole thing. And then section 3 of the book is a commentary by this guy that's stolen the poem, and he's putting these extremely and increasingly incredulous footnotes and explanations for certain lines and certain phrases, and just spouting off just totally in seemingly unrelated vistas of what this poem is even about. And then the 4th section is an index of terms in it, which is easy to overlook, but there's a lot of weird stuff in the index intentionally. Yeah. But nonetheless, and I guess this is back to the question of what makes a rhymed poems corny or not corny. And people debate this about the villanelle in Joyce's portrait of the artist as a young man. Like he symbolizes his development as a poet, as a writer, by writing a villanelle. And there's much debate over was this Joyce making fun of this person's self-assured proficiency? Was this Joyce, because Joyce he wrote a lot of poetry.
Right.
Do you know Syd Barrett, his album The Madcap Laughs? That song "Look Out My Window." That's a Joyce poem. I never knew that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Really? I know, right? Isn't that funny? Yeah, that's a James Joyce poem.
Huh. Very cool.
Fun little thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, much like people wonder about Joyce's villanelle in that. Also, just a fun side note: the villanelle is the one of these French forms that we've inherited that was never meant to be a form. It just sort of got confused as one. Some guy around the time of the French Pleiad poets, 17th century or whatever, a lesser one named Jean Passerat, did this poems in rhymes. It's that one villanelle about where is my turtle dove? Well, the French word is turtle dove is tourterelle, but I didn't want to use turtle dove and I didn't want to use dove. And I thought, whippoorwill, tourterelle, whippoorwill. It has kind of a similar, kind of a Hank Williams thing to it. A little liberal, but nonetheless, Passerat is some sort of court appointment. I don't remember what it is, but the king, Henry II, Henry III, I don't remember, one of his mistresses dies, and so all these poets are basically just airmailing poems into the king about this dead mistress, but you can't say you're sorry your mistress is dead,
Right.
So Passerat writes a ton of these, and one of them is simply titled Villanelle, and it's in this form that no one's seen before because he made it up. And he dies without much fanfare eventually, and the poem more or less dies with him. And then, 150 years later, some Frenchman is compiling a rhyming dictionary. And again, when you rhyme, you need a rhyming dictionary.
Yeah.
That's something the students are saving money on today. You don't need a rhyming dictionary. But but he has an index of forms in there, and somehow he stumbled upon this Passerat poem of Villanelle, and he includes it as one of its forms. And then eventually, in like the 19th century in France, it becomes popular as a sort of satiric form. And then when the Victorians are, like I said, discovering all these French forms again, they unearth it and they start writing them. And that's how eventually in the 20th century you get, again, Dylan Thomas, Elizabeth Bishop, Sylvia Plath are all writing like villanelles. You could argue it's like maybe the most respectfully treated form in the 20th century, which is not a century particularly friendly to poetic form. And the form that they're so devoted to was not even meant to be a form. This guy just wrote it as a one.
It was one poem.
It just slowly had a patina of respectability and formaliness attached to it.
That's interesting, because a lot of the people who were probably writing it in the 20th century, maybe not Sylvia Plath. I mean, she was pretty in the know and sophisticated, but I'm sure a lot of the people who were writing the Villanelle thought of themselves as sort of casting back to this traditional format, right? In which
they had no reason not to think that, right? There was
right, but return with a V, but it's literally just one poem.
Yeah,
and we'll all do it. That's very very interesting.
The thing, really, is something gets out of your hands and it turns into this kind of what's the movie with the Coke bottle? The gods must be crazy.
right. Yeah, that's very exactly. Yeah. Well, we didn't finish Pale Townie though.
No, I didn't.
We set it up. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Oh, but there's a big question about this 1,999 line poem in Pale Fire by Nabokov as to whether it was, if he was parodying someone, if he was not parodying someone, if he was parodying himself, if he was parodying poetry, or if he just wanted to write a really good poem and just put up some blocks to, to filter people or whatever, right? But nonetheless, when I read it, I loved the poem, and I really, so much so that I read the poem and I put the book down and didn't come back to it for quite a while, like months and months. And I don't know how I got it into my head, but again, I don't know how I got it in my head to write 50 roundels, But at some point, I was just like, what if I kept all the end rhymes and just, did 9 syllables in front of each, or whatever.
Yeah.
And do another poem in front of it. And I did, eventually. I think back now, and it's like, golly, I don't think I'd want to do that again. It seemed really not enjoyable. That's what Pale Townie is. And it'll have certain similarities and affinities to the original because, 999 of the words are the same, and most end rhymes are, nouns or verbs or whatnot. So there's going to be certain shadowy, similarities to it, and you can lean into or out of that, as the situation dictates. But no, I don't think there's any real. I was talking with you before this about like who messaged who first, and it's probably impossible to find out now because Twitter's messages are so fucked now. You can't search anything.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just scroll.
Right, and
but there was a text because I was like, why? Because somebody asked me this before, and I was like, I don't know how I got it in my head, and I just found a text I sent somebody I guess when I started, which was 2023 or something, and I was just like, what if I kept all the end rhymes for Pale Fire, lol, that was,
right.
that was the seed of it. It was me, because you text someone that you're going to do it, then you have to do it.
Right. Well, isn't that funny how that works? It's sort of like, it's like, well, this is a wild idea. I have definitely had that experience in my own life where it's like you have the idea and then it's like, well, now you become committed to it somehow. Now it's like, oh, I have to do that now.
Oh, for sure.
And then next thing you know, you're 800 couplets in or whatever.
There's a million ideas like that obviously I still tell people I don't do them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not the same as just magically if you just tell someone you do it. And usually it's the opposite. If you tell someone, it's like, okay, this is not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, sometimes there's the flip side is you give you say the idea of the thing you want to do, and then you sort of get that little dopamine hit to make it oversimplify it from just saying the idea, and then you're not motivated to do it for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's just enough to sort of.
Yeah, I've had writing projects like that where I explain to somebody and they're like, that sounds really cool, and then the next day I have no motivation to do it because I already got my satisfaction from it or whatever.
Exactly. It was the wrong thing. So is that a good explanation of that? Is that a good?
Yeah, I think so. I just
Really
again want to
there for a
yeah,
second.
yeah, I just want to highlight again, people, definitely pick up rhymes, but go back and get Pale Townie as well. I mean, I enjoyed both of them. I think that was the first stuff I'd really read of yours, Tom, other than maybe some scattered poems on an online source. I'm not sure, but yeah,
Yeah,
and I really liked it.
I was definitely publishing online a lot more active. Like I was just like I have a big spreadsheet. I'm sure you,
Yeah.
right, for better or for worse, has one of those Excel spreadsheets with red and green,
Right. Yep.
highlights
Yep.
of what have I sent to, and it's been 2 years. Should I email them back?
Right. Yeah.
But it's nice
No,
to
it's
not,
a,
it's nice to not do that quite so much at the moment.
Oh yeah, I've kind of I think I've given up on blind submission actually. I think I'm kind of done with it. Like if it's something I know, people I know, project I'm familiar with, somebody comes to me or whatever, that's one thing, but I just don't think I'm going to go through it anymore, sending stuff to random people. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
I'll wish I had, but
no, I think, and there's also like you need to do different things at different stages of anything, right? And I think when you're starting, there's definitely that, and it can go very bad. Obviously, like it's like walking into a party and like you don't know anyone. And the first person you meet, it's like, this is my best friend. This is
right,
the first
yeah.
This is the first person I met at college. This is my best friend.
Yeah.
And then after like 5 minutes, you're like, oh wait, maybe I should have been more prudent.
Right.
But it's good to sow some of those wild oats and just send stuff wherever, and usually
Yeah.
it works out pretty well, and usually you'll find the right people. And hell, that's probably how I found Bill with Farthest Heaven. We were on the same project over at Apocalypse Confidential, which is still going, which is still a fantastic project.
Yeah.
But again, that was a really fantastic, writers room. I don't know what the hell you call it. It was just a really, really fantastic group of people, and still is. But again, that it didn't have to be that way.
Right. It could be terrible. Yeah.
As the old song goes, if you get in with the right bunch of fellas, that's a very difficult. It's very difficult to get in with the right bunch of fellas.
Yeah.
But it does happen. But eventually you kind of get your own little thing, ossified somewhat, and then you don't want to just send out everything all the time.
Right.
And then you know it's time because everybody's sending you stuff.
That's true too. Yeah.
That's the real trick. Just start something, and then everyone will send you everything, and then you'll have to read 1,000 pages of poems, and you'll have to decide why it's good or bad. And not only will you have to not just have a twinge in yourself of why do I like or not like this, you have to explain it to this person. And then that person's going to send you something like 3 months later, So,
Right.
so you have to remember. So that's a pretty good way to cut your teeth. Honestly, is just do that and don't.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's a good point. I'm going to be doing. I am a guest editor for an Apocalypse Confidential special later this year. So it's been a while since I've done any sort of editorial, anything like that. So it's going to be interesting.
Not the real one. Is this, if it's not announced, you can't.
I don't think I can announce, but yeah.
I'll just bug Jacob and go, what's this stuff?
Sure. Yeah. No, we talked about it like last year, and then now just very, very recently we started talking about it again. So, but yeah, that'll be. And I did that. I worked for when I was going to the University of Texas. I worked for the Bat City Review, which is one of the sort of the academic, the college supported journal that comes out of University of Texas. And I don't know, I learned a lot from that process. The one thing though I did, I saw that was sort of an issue with it, and that it was sort of particular to, I think, that journal and a lot of the other academic journals, and this wouldn't apply to something like Apocalypse Confidential, where it's sort of like everybody's kind of coming together out of like a mutual taste thing. It seemed to me that at Bat City Review, what ended up in the journal was the stuff that everybody hated the least, which is very different than the best stuff. It ended up just being like everything when there was kind of inoffensive and I didn't hate any of it, but like a lot of times my favorite thing in the stack did not end up in the magazine. And it opened my eyes to like, oh, it's anytime you submit anything anyplace, it's just a half dozen people in a room. Like ultimately, that's all it is.
These are people that probably couldn't decide where to order lunch from. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a bad way, because I don't want to get tied. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
But,
It's not a
but you,
criticism of any of the individual people. It's like more of the nature of the beast, kind of. It's just sort of how it works.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's more chefs in the kitchen. It's the fact that you're a school journal and you're getting money for this, and if you don't put something out, you don't get the money.
Right.
So we better put something out, and
Right.
if we don't have people doing this, then we don't get the money. So we need to have such and
Right.
such amount of people. So you have
Yeah.
to do it, and you have to do so many people, and to the degree those things increase, yeah, it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Which is why it's nice to do like Farthest Heaven right now is just Bill. He's the only one on the masthead. You know,
Right.
I get to read the manuscripts and sort of whisper.
Right.
I describe myself as the sort of the little skulking Rasputin character of it that just gets to say do this, do that.
Right. Right.
But it's mostly it's 1.5 people at most at all times. And that's a pretty good fit. I think. I mean, putting
And
out
it's
anything more than 5 books a year would just seem.
yeah. It's probably the best. It's probably the best result to do something cool and interesting, right?
Yeah,
It's probably to like
absolutely.
keep. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
hell, I don't want to read more than 5 new books a year. Like I'll read a lot of books a year, and we'll get into that, like you said. But like
Yeah.
that's a lot of new. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily searching for the new thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this makes me realize, and I had no intention of asking you this, but I had an interaction with this person, and probably you did too.
God.
Maybe you did, or maybe you didn't see it. This, I think it was kind of controversial, like in some of the circles on Twitter that you and
Where are
I
we
run
going
in.
with this? Where are we going?
I think her name is Yasmin something. Did you see this? And
Oh,
she was dunking
yeah,
on, I think, Burial magazine for like not paying its writers,
yeah.
and it's had some weird like neo leftist like, if you can't pay your writers, you shouldn't exist, and it's a class thing, and it means that like if you can write for free, that means you must be super privileged. It was very bizarre to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I saw it, and then I saw the second comment, and the person was explaining that this was because they were a leftist and not a Marxist, and that was at that point I was like, oh, well,
I was like,
I can just ignore this,
yes,
ignore this
exactly,
whole hog. But
exactly. Opinion
yeah,
disregarded. Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty much that.
yeah,
But yeah, and we've both been around long enough where this sort of rolls around ever so often, or some version of this rolls around ever so often. And
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the only really effective rule of thumb for me is as to what's a small and what's a large operation for a press, at least, is you know a small press doesn't pay you in advance, a large press pays you in advance, or a
yeah,
non-small press pays you in advance. And I guess this probably holds the same for magazines, but again,
yeah.
you know, I don't like the, and I don't, who cares what she said, but
Right.
and even if she didn't say this, but the implication that the more money is pumped into something, the better work, the more lasting, the more meaningful it is obviously not true. It can be
Right.
true, and certainly
Right.
in a lot of ways it is true. Would I like would I like some money? Yes, thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
You know, but some of the favorite things, some of my favorite poets, I always harp on about Gerard Manley Hopkins. Jesuit, died extremely young in extremely bad circumstances. He published maybe one poem in his life. It wasn't even published. It was like he had wrote a May song for Mary for the Jesuits, and it
Mm.
was it was the most conventional thing he could possibly write because no one would read anything else he wrote because it was so odd.
Mm.
And he dies, and he was lucky enough to be friends with Robert Bridges, who was about to become the poet laureate of England. And then it takes another 20 or 30 years to get Hopkins' poetry published, and it's an edition of 300 or something like that.
Hmm.
And then it takes a decade and a half for that to sell out, just the first edition. But by that time, it's the middle of the early 20th century, and Hart Crane is begging his publisher to send him a copy of it from England, and he'll trade royalties on his meager book sales just to get a copy of it.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't. You can any good piece of art will hopefully fly in the face of people that are asking to get paid. And Burial's
Right.
it's a good magazine. I don't understand these people. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't understand what they get up in the morning and think about. and worry about. I could
Yeah.
ramble for
Yeah,
forever.
no, it's just such a weird thing because like you said, I just put a book out. I sell some copies. I like selling copies. It's not enough. It's not enough. The money that is coming in is insubstantial. It doesn't really matter. It's nice when it shows up. It's kind of cool. Like I I think it's enough for me to maybe buy a plane ticket overall, which is, hey, that's pretty cool. Um, uh, but like, I guess what's interesting about that, it's like, so I have gotten paid for like bits of writing here and there. And it's nice when that happens and somebody like sends you some money, whatever it is for an article or whatever. But uh, anytime that's happened, even still, when you do get paid, and this is not a complaint, I'm trying to figure out a bigger point. It's not a complaint at all. Even when I've gotten paid from a publication or something, the amount has been so minimal that it's felt more like just a token of appreciation, which I'm glad to get. Like, it's cool that that sort of relationship's being acknowledged. But like, I mean, you need to get paid. If you're going to I guess my point is, if you're going to translate the writing enterprise into some kind of getting paid by the hour sort of thing, there's like almost no amount of money you're ever going to get that's equivalent to the work that you put in.
Right.
Right.
No, like, that's
Like,
that's it. That's it exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
This is
Like,
something that
I just put this novel out. I probably spent, I don't know, 6,000 hours. I don't know, like thousands of hours on
oh
it.
yeah.
I'm never gonna get, unless it gets like a movie deal or something. I'm never gonna get that money back for that time. It's ridiculous to even think you would, I guess, is the point. Yeah. So I don't know. Anyway, that tweet kind of rattled me a little bit. I usually don't let them, but it was part of it. I think was like this smug, like
Well, that's the thing too. Is
cultural,
like
political part of it. Yeah.
that's the thing too. Is like whenever I see whenever these people come out of wherever it is they come out of, and
Right.
I like hear their opinion, I'm
Yeah.
I'm reminded of like the spate of like the like extremely bitter like last 10 years of like articles about like men don't read, like men just don't want
Yeah.
to read, like
Yeah.
why don't men read, and
Yeah.
every like shade of like spittle flecking that comes from these sort of articles, and then I like see this person and I'm like, this person probably reads, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like this is the target demographic, like this is
Right.
not to not to paint with not to make any broad generalizations, but it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
like finally the readers are finally the adults are in the room,
Right.
spending
Yeah. Yeah.
between Marxism and leftism and why burial should, I don't know,
Right.
but
Right.
yeah,
Right.
again, like this is all so far from when I want to write something or when I want to
Yeah.
publish something, when I want to read something. This is all just so far. I just can't.
Right.
It's such a bizarre juxtaposition. I just don't know what makes these people wake
I,
up.
yeah. I don't get it either. And this is, I mean, and as a poet particularly, there is something I think a poet has to do, and correct me if totally correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a poet, but there's something to me that is absolutely beautiful about the poet in, I don't know, 21st century or contemporary arena, because you can be masters of the art form, and yet the space for the poet in the culture is kind of small, right? And it sort of doesn't leak outside of itself in a lot of ways. It's fairly like contained. So there's something to me like dramatic and romantic and beautiful about like, I'm going to write poetry and I'm going to put out a collection of poems. I don't know if there's a question baked in there, but like maybe I guess we get to steer this back to like sort of Tom Will and what makes you sort of tick as a writer and what makes your work work. Do you, I guess, how do I want to frame this? I mean, what do
Why do
you
you
see as
persist?
like
Why do
the
you
role?
continue to? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, I guess that's a way. Like, why do you continue? I feel like I know sort of, but like, why do you keep writing poetry? That's a
I don't know. Well, I'm not
deceptively
sure.
simple question.
No, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, it's. I'm like, it's something I enjoy, and then I'm like, that's not exactly true most of the time. I've been. This next book is like one I've spent the most time on, like beforehand. And I'm still, you still dread it, but you're still also like, thank God, get it out there, get it out. I don't, things just have a way of it finds a way. I don't know. It is something I enjoy. Uh, it seems to be one of the few ways I'm good at making things. Um, I tried to write a novel, but it was no good. I don't think I started early enough to be a decent musician. That's just a blissful cope. But I don't know. I enjoy it. I enjoy the surprise of it. I enjoy the idea of a book of poetry.
Right.
I enjoy the idea of a book of poetry where you just have 100 pages and they more or less don't have anything to do with each other, or at least they have that potential. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea that there's this book where you can love one thing and then just hate the other thing. And there's an awful lot of amplitude, in collections of poetry, and from poem to poem, and from book to book in poets. I guess I'm not saying why I do it. I guess I'm saying why. Let's just accept the axiom that I have to do something.
Right.
And then what do you do? And I guess I like doing poetry because it has that extreme amplitude from page to page, from book to book within the same poet, even from line to line if you want. And I don't think I guess poetry and painting always kind of are the closest together. So I guess that's the closest analog. But I don't know. And much like why did I write this, or why did I write Tell Townie or something like that? Eventually you get to a point where you don't really remember, and then
Right.
and something divorced from you or outside of you. And I like that about poems. I like the architecture of it, that it's this thing that you've made, and it's this thing that's discrete from you, unless you're editing it after the fact. It's this thing that's discrete from you. But someone else will come along and start taking things out of it that you didn't know were in there, a rabbit out of a hat style. Or a poet will come back and tell you a little bit about writing a poem, and you'll see them taking things out of it. And yet it keeps the same shape. It doesn't get any bigger. It doesn't get any smaller. People are putting things into it, taking things out of it. And again, any work of art has that, but I think with poetry it's the most discrete and unique sort of expression of that sort of artistic architecture. And I guess that is slowly getting around to why do it at all, and it's because that's sort of an analog for life, and I guess I like that about it. But again, that's that was not you don't start doing anything with a series of syllogisms or whatever. But
Right. Of course. This is sort of there's a
but you
post
find out
hoc
what you like,
element
and
of
you
this.
find out why you like it.
Right. Well, and I do think, and you're very good at it. I do think there is a certain wisdom in just following the thing that you're good at, right? There's a certain I'm similar to I'm not any good at music. I gave up even trying at one point, and I'm not very good at any kind of. I maybe could have done something in the visual arts realm if I'd really dedicated myself to it, but I didn't, and was not a very good athlete or anything like that. So at some point you're like, I do seem like I'm pretty good at this, and I do think there's an element of somehow that's what you're supposed to do in some way, but certainly a lot of people have kind of ignored that voice for any number of reasons. It's just interesting to hear you describe that, and the thing is, you say you kind of started talking about that with, well, I enjoy it, and this is one of the things that I like about your work is I can feel that you enjoy it when I'm reading it. I can feel you. Fun isn't quite the right word exactly, even though I think in some cases it probably is. But I can feel that this is a process that is stimulating for you, that you're enjoying this, that you're kind of playing a game on some level.
And not to be overly titillating, but it's the capacity to be seduced. And again, that's something else that with every page you turn of a collection of poetry that has to happen again and again and again in extremely different circumstances. I've not read much. I'm sure I'm not as well read in fiction as you, and I'm pretty sure I'm not as well read in fiction as most readers or writers of fiction. But one of the closest fictional analogs for that, I would say two. I would say that the more sober adult one would be Borges. And then I would say the more childish one that I know better because it was the first writer I really liked a lot is Ray Bradbury.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
With his short stories, obviously, because
Yeah.
he has like 20, 30 of them in a book, and every single one he's like, you've got 5 pages to get very excited about trapdoor spiders. You've got 5 pages, you get very excited about Irishmen driving bicycles in the fog at night.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And I think that's, I'm glad that's coming through because that's again part of the joy of it. Part of the joy of the act of it and joy of reading it is seeing someone have a new affair,
Right.
on any page. But it is the capacity to be seduced by an object, an image, or a complex of objects.
Yeah. No, I love that. I wanted to talk a little bit because we talked about the roundel, which is probably the largest, the form that shows up in the most instances, and there's some great ones in there. I was looking at like what are my favorite ones, and I realized a lot of them you have just titled roundel.
Oh.
Because I was going back through there and I was like, oh wait, that's not what the one I thought it was. But there's so many good ones in there. But the sort of back half of the book, you transition into. Oh, actually, before we get there, the one thing I noticed that I saw that you did was arrangements, effectively arranging some other poets' work into roundels, such as a Shakespeare sonnet. I think a poem by Randall Jarrell. I may not even be saying his name right. And then I a couple of these I went and I looked at what the original was because I wasn't familiar with them. I don't know Shakespeare sonnets by heart by any means. And you took some, and I'm saying this in the best possible way, like most positive possible way. You took some major liberties with these things to sort of stuff them into the roundel, and I found that to be, I found that to be fascinating. I was hoping you could like tell me a little bit about that. What makes something a poem that not only you like, but a poem that you might want to arrange, right? Like, because that's got to be two different things, right? Like, I like this poem, but I also maybe I can do something with it.
And it wasn't intended to be a mix of like, ooh, some poems everybody knows, some poems nobody knows. Probably the most well-known one is probably Ave Maria by Frank O'Hara in there. Which was an early favorite poem of mine. Not early favorite, but it was just, you're a kid and you're like, what the hell is this? Mothers of America, let your children go to the movies. They may thank you for their first sexual, what the hell is
Yeah, it's pretty
what
crazy.
On this But yeah, the Shakespeare one is Sonnet 3. And yeah, that one was extremely liberal because in the poem, these are the procreation sonnets of Shakespeare where he's talking to some unknown young person, and telling them like, you should have children now. You should, and there's like 100 of them. There's a lot of them. And the third sonnet number, this one is basically him telling him to look into his reflection in the glass of some drink. And he's talking about you need to, look at that, and you need to just like you're doubling yourself, you need to double yourself. And oh no, I'm. It's so easy to lie. It's so easy to lie. In the poem, he says, "Look in the glass," and he's talking about like a looking glass, like a mirror, or a polished surface. But in reading the actual poem, there's something of a way to interpret it as him talking about like drinking a glass and looking through the glass, or looking at a reflection in the glass. And I thought that was just fun. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and yeah, I'm going to say it's I'm going to go ahead and say it's been reformatted. But in reality, I'm obviously taking quite a few liberties, which is not new. I didn't invent the rakish translation. I think in the intro to Pale Townie, I talk about Jack Spicer's After Lorca a lot, which is a great example of that. Not to get back away from this, but it was. At a certain point, I was doing that, and I did a couple. I did a Marianne Moore poem. I did a Randall Jarrell poem. I did. There's a lot of those I kicked out too. There's a lot of stuff. Like I tried to do a Keats one. I was like, this is not. I'm not.
Nothing worked.
I'm not the guy for that. But no, at a certain point, it was just like, well, I haven't written anything today. Let's read a poem. And it's like, well, let's see what we can do with it. I think even one of them was my own poem. It was a sonnet from my last book, and
I noticed that too. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, we're sort of remixing your own work, which is cool. Which is I've never seen anybody do that before. I'm sure somebody's done it out there in the world, but I thought that was a cool move.
I don't think if someone's directly done that, but I can't think of anyone
Nothing
exact.
comes to mind.
I'm thinking of like extremely rakish, like in a collection of light verse I have. Somebody has a somebody took someone took "Ode to a Grecian Urn" and made it like 4 lines.
Oh,
And
really?
it's
Interesting.
yeah, but it's just like I'll have to find it. We'll put it in the show notes. I always
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
say it. But
Yeah.
someone made it like but it's
Okay.
like
Okay.
4 lines of 2 syllables, like or people will take like famous poems and make them limericks or something like that. But
Sure.
what I've attempted is obviously a little rakish, a little bit of tousling of the hair, but not quite as much as that maybe. But it's not different, and as readers of mine, wherever they are aware, I don't shy away from putting limericks into collections.
Right. Right.
Although there's no limericks in this one, unfortunately, we do have the triolets are probably as limericky as we get. But sorry, I'm getting away from things. You're asking how did I decide? I guess mostly it was just
Yeah.
if there was a day where I couldn't do anything else, I would just try and do one and see if it would work. And sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't. I'll tell you a fun little secret thing though. The Marianne Moore one, Rosemary. The initial poem of hers, Rosemary, which is a fantastic poem of hers, and it's about all of her poems are sort of like research projects, or it's one of her poetic techniques is like research and quoting sources. But it's this idea of rosemary and the different things that it can mean. There's a legend where Mary is fleeing into Egypt, and she flings her cloak over herself and the baby, and a rosemary bush or they appear as a rosemary bush
Okay.
when the soldiers pass by or something like that, and so that's why the rosemary has Mary in blue flowers with
Right.
white flowerets, and that's why it only grows as tall as a man because Christ died when he was 33. And things like this. But the original scheme for that, she's using like the rhyme scheme for it because she also used rhyme, and she used her own version of it, but she did. But the end rhymes for it are like a, like it's all ending like rosemary, plain to see, Christmas tree, like it's all, which I thought was really nice, and I couldn't quite capture that in that particular poem. I just did the conventional roundel form, but then the very next poem in there, I used that
Oh,
and
interesting.
I was like, I want to put it somewhere, so I just put it right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of
That's
which one.
pretty cool.
The shoe one. A lovely splinter, you in my shoe, rolled it,
Yes.
blue. Just more true. Lovely splinter, you blue. Yeah. So
Yeah, I like that one. So
yeah. So
there is a way in which these are talking to each other then for
oh, for
sure.
sure. It was
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
carefully sequenced too. We just print everything out, take the pen to it, shuffle it around.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Again, we've had the most time with it, but I don't think we over needed the dough or anything like that. But we definitely needed it.
No, certainly not. There's also in the back half of the book after the roundel section, you get into you've got Englands and chansons, I think they're called. I might be mispronouncing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you a little bit about the chanson, because I noticed once you got into the chansons, the subject matter got very much became romantic. It became about love relationships, requited or unrequited, or which which showed up in the earlier part of the book, showed up in the roundels here and there, but it felt like once we got into chanson territory, we were in love poetry territory. And I was curious about that. Is that something that's sort of endemic to that form, or was it sort of coincidental?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, guys, tell me
Absolutely.
a little bit about the chanson, and then maybe tell me a little bit
Sure.
about the sort of
Yeah.
this transition I noticed, whether I'm making it up or not.
No. It's just the French
Yeah.
word for song, chanson.
Okay.
You can put on a song by somebody from the 20th century, like Serge Gainsbourg or Jacques Brel, and it's a chanson.
Oh, okay.
So but those chansons, I guess it would probably help to tell people that the book to come out rhymes is going to be in 3 sections. The first section is 50 roundels. It's called a half century of roundels, as opposed to Swinburne's century, because I couldn't, I could barely do 50, so that's as many as we did. Then the middle is just a collection of poems, sonnets, couplets, villanelles, triolets, etc. And then the final third are some translations of some of the chansons of Clement Moreau, who was real. And if you're going, yeah, these all have a certain feeling and they feel a little different, it's because they're 600 years ago. That's exactly why. Moreau was somewhere between the great French poet Francois Villon, who's considered like the Chaucer or the Dante of French poetry. He's somewhere between that and like the French like Renaissance of poetry, people like Rabelais and Ronsard, the Pliade, and things like that. And the chanson is a particular form he wrote, because the collected works of Moreau are massive. He wrote hundreds of rondels, rondeaux. I don't think he wrote any triolets, which is unfortunate. He wrote a lot of ballads. He also wrote a lot of epistolary poems, which I find really cute. Like, they're letters to his friends in verse. But sometimes they're not real people. Cool. Sometimes it's like, this is a letter of two old soldiers talking to each other. And like, yeah, he accompanied the king of France on certain, because he was a court member. He was present for certain, at that point France is just constantly trying to, like, we're going to take Venice, we're going to take Pisa, and they're just constantly doing it and not doing it, and doing it and not doing it. Yeah. So he has a few that are like that, but they're like written from different points of view of his. There's a really cute epistolary letter he writes to Anne of Brittany's daughter, I think, who was like 7 or 8 years old and she's sick. And so he writes like a get well soon letter to her. But it's a very inventive form too. And again, he's just making it up as he goes along. But it's like 30 lines of 3 syllables each. So it's like ma mignon, je boudon, ba 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 ba. It's like very cute. Actually, there's a really good, you know the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, that Douglas Hofstadter?
Yeah.
So the book he wrote pretty much right after that is all about this poet, Clement Moreau. And it's about that one. Okay. Yeah, no one really seems to talk about that. That one seems to get all the juice. But the reason he wrote this book after it is people were trying to, it was such a hit. GED was such a hit. And I'm not trying to debate the merits or not merits of GED. I read it in college, and I'm glad I found it then. Would I find it as charming now? Maybe, probably. But nonetheless, it was a mega hit. And people were like trying to translate it into like Chinese and like Russian. Right. It's like, how do you? The book is just full of language-based, puns and word plays and anagrams and just all sorts of like. And how the hell do you translate that from one language to another?
Yeah. It's like translating Finnegan's Wake or something. It's like, what are we doing?
Extremely difficult. And so he, for some reason, gets really interested in translation because of this. And at some point, he finds this Moreau poem. And so the whole book is basically him trying to make the perfect translation of this Moreau poem. The book has maybe 100 versions of it. I tried my own at a certain point. I almost put it in, but it just didn't seem quite right for the book. Which I think is how I got really acquainted with the poet Clement Moreau. But that book of Hofstadter's is, I think, called Le Tombeau de Moreau, the beautiful sound of Moreau, but it's supposed to sound like tombeau, like tomb, like a pun. That's a really interesting Hofstadter book just about translation. And while it's not entirely about Moreau, it's a very interesting look at him. But either way, I was going through all these forms that he wrote, his epistolary letters. He translated the Psalms into French, which he had to like flee the country for because you weren't supposed to do that yet.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
But very early on, I think, because he had 2 major collections, but by the time his first collection came out, he was like 30, 36 maybe. He had a series of chansons, which are songs, which means they're meant to be sung. Now, he wasn't a musician. He couldn't, at least as much as we know, he did not set them to music. He did not, arrange music and publish them with music. And we have poets like that in England, like Campion, Thomas Campion. All of his poems were, to be, songs with a lute and melodies, and he wrote the melodies and whatnot. But Moreau would write these chansons. And again, you can set any words to music. It's not particularly difficult. But at that time, there were a lot of rapid advancements in printing, not just for books, but for printing sheet music. Someone named Détainement, his name means like attainment. It's a very strange French name. There's a book about him, and I can't think of the name of the book. That's really interesting about this guy that developed a way to basically print like sheet music templates. Like he could just print the sheet music and then print the notes on top of it, and everything would line up. But basically all these chansons, like Clement would write them and send them to his friends, but people were just printing them out. Like they were so popular. And we don't know who set them to music in a lot of the cases, but a lot of them were very popular. Henry VIII, the wife, the one he killed, the one he beheaded, Anne Boleyn. She was in the French court for a while. She had a big book of songs, and a few of his songs are in it.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So, maybe she was singing these for, but nonetheless, I found a certain charm to them, and I thought I would give it a shot at translating them. I'm sure
I know, and the reason I asked this question, and it may be a stupid question, I knew somebody involved in translating a poet, a living poet, and it was a collaborative enterprise. And my friend, who is an English speaker, didn't actually know the poet's native language. So they had this kind of tortured process in which the poet was from an Eastern European country, and he would do a rough translation into English, and then they would take that rough translation and sort of collaborate on it together, and my poet friend would try to make it good. Right? But so the reason I asked this question is, how good is your French? And does it matter if your French is great? Can you manage a translation without? I mean, obviously, if your French isn't good, you can, because they were very, very enjoyable to read. But I'm curious about that process. Yeah.
Ça va pas. It's very bad. It's very bad. But I've been really working at it. No, and again, it's that. Just learning a language is horrible, but if I want to do it for the purpose of doing this, it makes it a little. It gives you a little more oomph. But and this is also not even like normal French. It's like fucking 16th century French.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, I mean, you'd ask me to translate translate 600-year-old English. I mean, I guess I could do it.
Right. Yeah, if you put Chaucer in front of me now, I would sound like a child.
Right.
I would manage, but no. It started where I there was some where I would read translations of them, and if you find translations of any older poet in another language, you'll find widely variant versions of them. And you'll go, I don't really like this one, or I don't really like that one, or I don't like either of them. And I guess with a lot of these, people weren't. I don't know. They were maybe true to the form, but they weren't necessarily true to the poem, or they weren't really true to poetry. And then a lot of it wasn't translated, so I just had no way of knowing what it was otherwise. So I was like, well, I want to know what's in here. And someone I think had provided on some website about Moreau, like an amateur website, someone had provided like basically what you're talking about with your friend, where they had just provided just prose translations of like the most base level of the meaning, And that's no small thing with Moreau, because the sort of retinue of poetic tradition he was steeped in, the grand rhetoricians or whatever, they were like obsessed with like wordplay with all these. I think that one essay in there, not essay. That was one of the notes I sent you with all these insane techniques they would use.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Where you'd have a rhyme, and then the fourth syllable of the next line has to rhyme with that. I think it's called rhyme.
Right.
Or something like
right.
that. So obviously, like a prose translation, or even, and it's not always obvious. Like you had a few of them, like I translated, and I was like, oh no, there was another, extremely fussy like complication. Like I think of them like watches, like they're like watch complications. Like this one has the date, this one has a stop. Like there's just so many little complications like built into these songs of his. So some of them I had prose to work on, some of them I had other poems to work on, some I just had to just sit there with Wiktionary and just go, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? And again, with the basic French primer, you can at least get a sense of structure and most basic words. And the one I used, I'm still using it. I haven't finished it. There's a really great book called French for Reading, by a guy named, I don't remember, but it's called French for Reading. It was basically a primer that a college professor wrote for like engineering students, where he was like, it's the 70s, you can't just type in something into Google and find out if this research has been done. You can't translate it. So here's a way for like students in one discipline to like understand French very quickly, so they can find out, basically, has my thesis already been written? It's only it's
Right.
only the
Yeah.
research. So it's not about pronunciation. It's not about you know.
It's not about even writing. It doesn't sound like it's not like we're gonna get you so
No,
we can
it's
order
just
at a restaurant
here's
or yeah.
yeah. It's like here's most of the cognates. And here's most of the basic verbs. Here's most of the basic structure. Here's what qua
Yeah.
and these things mean. So that was really useful. And then I had a lot of friends that spoke French or were French or Belgian or something. I'd be like, is this too much? Like, is this Yeah, I wish I was a native speaker or just had so I could sort of trust myself, but I really don't. And I what does Nabokov call them in his introduction to Onegin? Like, I'm sure there are some howlers and some bubblers, and things like that. I'm sure there's some really horrible mistakes in there, but I'd like to think I did a little better than not. And I'm not against the the Ezra Pound school of translation, where you're reading a crib of Chinese translated into Japanese, translated into English.
Right.
And you're basing it off that. I'm not against that, and I'm not against misunderstanding. Half of the poem, not half of them, but like you could take "Encounter in the Cage Country" by James Dickey, which is one of the poems I arranged for the roundel. That was based on a total misunderstanding of the poem. I thought that poem was about him like visiting like prison inmates or something like that. But no, it's about because I'm a fucking idiot. No, it's a poem about him like at a zoo, like visiting like a tiger or a panther. It's just
Very different. Yeah.
wrong. It's completely wrong. So I'm not sure if that's encouraging people or
That's no, I think hey, no, I mean it's not about I don't think in any of those cases cracking this open to read an arrangement of a Shakespeare sonnet or a James Dickey poem or a chanson from this French gentleman from the 16th century or whatever it was. I don't think the point of it is to read it so you get some kind of academic thing where you can stroke your beard and go, ah, ha, ha, ha. I mean, we're trying to enjoy these things, right? And get a
that's
feeling from them. So,
And while I love Nabokov's translation of Eugene Onegin, are you familiar with his translation of Eugene Onegin?
I'm not, no.
Well,
Yeah.
Eugene Onegin was a major a novel in verse by Pushkin, who's like the great modernizer of French writing. And it's in this it's a novel in verse. I think like Byron maybe, where you just have all these Byronic big stanzas for Don Juan or whatever. But it's a very difficult meter. It's very complicated. It's a combination of male and female rhymes we don't have to get into. But nonetheless, Nabokov at some point took it upon himself to try and translate it into English, and he decided basically it can't be done and be true to the rhyme and meter. But also, like the same year he put it out, like 3 other translations of it came out, like somewhat unbeknownst to him. So he was just going full fire and brimstone on these people piping in music, to his beloved Pushkin. But then most people didn't really care for his translation, so then it was a whole other thing. But he's constantly in his introduction talking about being about being true to the student of Pushkin. And it's like, I'm not a student of Moreau, I'm not a student of Pushkin, I'm not a student of Nabokov. I'm just someone that enjoys reading and writing. And even Moreau, was and again, it's always funny to look at the attitudes of poets themselves to translation. Not Moreau, but I think it was Edmund Spenser, the English, Fairy Queen and all that. He wrote a bunch of poems, marriage poems, sonnets called the Amoretti, which also pop up in
Which
there.
one's
But the Amoretti is part of a 2-part marriage poem for a woman who's marrying. The first part was sonnets called Amoretti, and the second half was a big marriage song called the Epithalamanion, or whatever the Greek word is for a marriage song, Epitha something. But in the middle of that, there are 2 little brief kind of like funny little tableaus, and those are based on Moreau poems, but they're extremely liberal translations. And I don't mind that. I don't mind the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam translated by Fitzgerald, which is completely untrue to the actual Rubaiyat, which I've never written, which I don't want to read.
Right.
So I don't mind. I'd much rather being true through what you think.
There's
It's a
something to
slippery
be
slope, obviously. Obviously, it's a
yeah,
slippery
but
slope, and you could justify the worst poetic mistakes in the world with that. But
right.
that's where we're at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but there's something to be said about not being overly precious about this stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
it'd be one thing if you're trying to do something academically to get to what the document says. For instance, totally unrelated, but I'm working on something else for this podcast in which I'm reading a book that goes into some translations of Demotic Egyptian, right?
oh,
And
wow.
I'm not reading it for its poetic flair. I'm trying to like glean some information out of it. I want them to do as good of and close a possible job as they can of translating it for this text. But yeah, I don't really care if you get Moreau exactly right. I want to read a good poem.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And and I never understand people that are taking, and also with the chansons, it's especially interesting because you can, and I only put like 20 or so in there. There's 42 that he wrote, and I tried to translate all of them, and I was thinking of doing them all, but just some of them really are just kind of just like very pro forma, just for its own. And he was very young. Right? Some he could have been as young as like 12 or 15 or something. So,
Okay.
but you can really see him sort of cutting his teeth going through it. From poem to poem, he'll change one little thing. He'll change the scheme a little bit. He'll change the line length just a little bit. He'll put the refrain here. Put the refrain. And I really enjoyed that. And to translate his chansons without that, it would be like doing a 3-verse translation of a limerick. You know what I mean? Like.
Right.
Which might be enjoyed by the serious student of the limerick, but
Yeah,
would somebody
yeah.
laugh at it?
Right, right, which is the point.
Nantucket, who had a very long, it wouldn't quite have the same,
Right.
it wouldn't quite have the same charm, would it? Which
Right.
is the whole point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I am nervous about that last part because it's poetry. I'm nervous about. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and trying to translate Renaissance medieval French. That's a little new. So it's like opening up a whole new way to just be just to be And who can why did you write this poem? This is a bad poem. Well, that's what I felt. But why did you completely molest the French? And it's like it's right there. I can't say if I make a mistake there, it's obvious what the mistake is because the
Right.
right there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's at the end for me. No,
I think people are going to enjoy it. I don't think you're going to get very much guff about it at all.
100%.
Yeah. As we kind of wind down here, I want to get to my last question that I ask pretty much every guest, especially if I haven't talked to them before. And this is, I want to get a couple books. And this is, my audience is all readers pretty much. And so we're always all looking for new books. I want to get a couple of books out of the Tom Will personal canon. This is 2 or 3 books that haven't been important to you, but you feel like might be a little bit under discussed or under regarded, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, this can kind of maybe help also with your initial question of like who writes poems that rhyme.
Yeah.
In 2026, and I would say my favorite living poet that has at least some sense of rhyme, and not necessarily form, because he has extremely long lines and just almost his poetic sensibilities seem almost like who was the guy for the New Yorker that wrote very, very funny, very, very shambling. He died eating like bad sauerkraut or like bad coleslaw.
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
I'm gonna look it up because it's so stupid. I have his whole book on it.
Yeah. Go for it. Look it up. I don't know that I've heard this, but you're gonna say the name. I'm gonna kick myself for not knowing it. I feel like
Ogden Nash. I didn't have to look it up.
Ogden Nash. Okay.
But I would say this poet I'm going to describe in a second almost has like an Ogden Nash-ish attitude toward line and rhyme. But if people want a living poet, he's rather old, a living poet,
Yeah.
I would suggest Frederick Seidel.
Okay.
Ooga Booga is the title of
Ooga Booga. All right.
Yeah, no, he's insane. He's like an extremely rich New Yorker, like independently wealthy. And he's published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. He never does interviews. He never does readings. There's a few recordings of him reading. They're very good. But like half the poems in here, like him talking about is like Ducati. Like I'm not even joking. But he's out of his mind. I mean, he's and his sense of rhyme is extremely, extremely insane. So I like Uga
Interesting.
Buga a lot. He's one called Life on Earth. I like a lot. He's another one I think called Going Faster that I like a lot. But Frederick Seidel, Seidel. That's an interesting one. You mentioned the Anglin, which is a Welsh form actually. I snuck in a Welsh form there.
Nice.
But the place I found that was a collection of poems by Alexander Thoreau, who's mostly known as a writer of fiction, Darganville's Cat.
Okay, yeah.
If you can find them, like they're all out of print, and they're massive.
I've never read any. That name rings a bell, though.
Yeah. But I think I found him because there was the guy just died, Michael Silverblatt, that did the Bookworm podcast. It was a radio show, but he was a fantastic interviewer. And there's one with Thoreau, and at the start of it, they're like, "Yeah, all of your books are out of print." But then at the end of the episode, they append on like a little thing, and they say, "Actually, as of the release of this interview, he has a book of poetry out." I said, "Oh, I didn't even know the guy wrote poetry." But he's very interesting, so I thought, "Oh, I'll get the book of poetry." It's called I'll grab it real quick. It's funny.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. This is good. We're getting some deep cuts because I'm not familiar with any of this stuff. And for people who you couldn't see it, that Seidel book is great because it's called Ooga Booga, which is the wildest title for a book. And then you have a very sober looking guy with a suit on. So,
no, yeah, he looks like a character out of and he sort of sounds like a character out of Frasier or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he just reads the most insane shit. When I lived in Sri Lanka, I called them Shrees. Like he'll just say the most insane shit. But the Lollipop Trollops by Alexander Thoreau. Again,
Trollops.
Insane name, Lollipop Trollops. It's the cover art you might recognize. It's what's his name? It's Gorey. It's Edward Gorey.
Edward Gorey. Okay, yeah.
He was sort of a interesting illustrator. But Thoreau in here, he wrote a very strange collection of poems. He has them arranged in alphabetical order, which I've never heard of a poet arranging poems.
Like based on the first word, just like
based on the title.
Based on the title. Okay, yeah, okay. That is interesting. So it's like I guess is as good of an order as any other, really,
yeah,
but it does seem odd. Yeah.
But nonetheless, he included in there something called the Welsh Anglin. I thought I'd never heard of that before. And you can tell it's really a very obscure form because like he has a paragraph at the start like explaining what the form is, which I didn't do. I just thought I would put it in. And again,
I wrote about it in your notes.
I put that in the roundel section because like I don't know. I was hoping. I was thinking a little bit of variety needed to be added in there, and it's very similar where the first line has the A and the B rhyme. It has similar DNA to the roundel, not intentionally, but
yeah, I could see that.
So I was hoping it would be a little bit of a diversion, not too much of a diversion. Similarly, there's a couple rather free roundels in there, and I've taken some of Corbier's rondels, which I like a lot, and put those into. But all that to say, the Anglin is a funny Welsh form which is based on Roman tombstones in England because they were there for quite a bit, and then they left, and so it's this sort of strange Welshifying of Latin and of Latin rules of poetry, which I'm no expert on, but it makes for a very interesting form called the Anglin. E-N-G-L-Y-N, I think. But I discovered that in here. But there's also some very good poems in this otherwise.
Lollipop Trollops by Justin.
Yeah, which is
Justin Thoreau. Yeah.
I'm choosing. I chose like the most like Ooga Booga and the Lollipop.
I love it. This is what I want. I want obscure. But when I ask people this question, this is like exactly what I want. I want kind of obscure, weird stuff, but that's really good.
I'll give you a third one that's a little more sober and it doesn't make it seem like a total Yahoo. So I like Ted Berrigan. Well, I like Ted Berrigan. Kind of a third wave New York school poet. He wrote a very interesting collection of sonnets called the Sonnets, which was at the time when I found it, it was a big deal to me, and it still is. But at the time, it was like I needed to read it. And I think City Light Books put out his collected prose because he was just wrote a ton of stuff, like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I was actually in San Francisco, which I'd never been before. And I went to City Lights, and they had it, so I got it. And he had a bunch of interesting. He wrote a lot of poetry reviews, and there was like 2 or 3 people in there that I was that I just never heard of, and one of them was someone called F.T. Prince. That's a very interesting name. And I found some of his poems, I think, that have been published in Poetry Magazine. And I liked them so much I got his book, and it's collected poems of F.T. Prince. I would highly recommend it. He was a 20th century guy, kind of a contemporary of Spender and Auden and things like that. Although he never really moved and developed in the same way that, say, Auden or Spender or any of that generation of English poets developed. But it's an extremely interesting collection of mostly formal poetry. So if people are looking for alternate perspectives of poetry from that aren't from the 16th century, F.T. Prince is a pretty interesting take on that. But yeah, those are 3. I was thinking I'll say Frank Stanford, but we've talked about him for the last 3 years. He's hardly he's pretty chick now, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. That's true. Yeah, he is. Well, okay, Tom, this was great. Again, I'm just going to recommend people get Rhymes from Tom Will. Also, check out the rest of Tom's work. There'll be links in the show notes to probably when this comes out, probably to pre-order. But if you're listening to it a little bit after that, to buy. And I'll have links to your social media. I don't know if there's anything I'm missing in terms of info that people need.
Sure. We're recording this middle of March. We should have a pre-order up for it pretty soon. That'll be on farthestheaven.com. That's just as simple as it is, farthestheaven.com. Farthest Heaven's on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. We'll have that in the notes or something, I'm sure. We've been doing some readings here lately, I'm happy to say. I did a reading. Well, I accompanied a reading that we did for our last book, Audrey Lee's Utter Goodness, which is a nice collection of short stories I'm really into. And we did a fantastic reading in D.C. for that in February. 80 people showed up.
Oh wow,
fantastic!
That's a lot.
There was a lot. It was an unqualified success that we didn't expect.
That's great.
But we're going to keep doing readings. We're hoping to do more. So we'll probably have some readings coming along. If you want us to come to Brazil, come to Brazil, or whatever. But we're not really sure totally where the people are, beside New York and LA. But the book will be out soon. Please buy it. Please pre-order it. The press Farthest Heaven already has a good half dozen books out. They're all fantastic. They're not print on demand. They're not Ingram. We're making the books. We're typesetting the books. We're sending them to a private printer. They're sending us the books, and we have them forever.
Yeah.
So they are extremely lovingly created, and we want to give them to you. So check out the website. They're all very good. If you buy things in bulk, obviously it'll save on shipping. But it'll be out. It'll be out here pretty soon. We should have the cover art coming out on at least the cover reveal. It doesn't matter when this will come out, but it should be out next week, which I'm extremely excited for. The art's by Petra Courtwright, who I really love. I asked her specifically for it, and it's just more perfect than I could have. So really excited to ship it.
Awesome. Well, you heard them, folks. Support indie artists, support super talented people like Tom Will, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had. He went down to the dope shop one Saturday night. He knew the lights would all be burning bright. Well, I guess he smoked a dozen pills or more. When he woke up, he was on a foreign shore. The Queen of Sheba was the first he met. She called him lovey-dovey and honey pet. She gave him a great big automobile with a diamond headlight and a golden wheel. Down in Honolulu, Willie fell in a trance. seeing the dusky beauties do the hula dance. His sweetie got in jail and Willie sure did shout when he got the news that she had wiggled out. He landed with a splash in the river Nile, riding on a sea-going crocodile. He winked at Cleopatra, she said, ain't he a sight? He said, how about a date for next Saturday night? He had 1,000,000 cattle and he had 1,000,000 sheep, had 1,000,000 vessels on the ocean deep, had $1,000,000 all in nickels and dimes. Well, he knew because he counted it 1,000 times. He landed in New York one evening late. He asked his sugar for an after date, started to kiss her and she started to pout when bang, bang, and the door gave